All right, guys, SleepyJ, pregame.com. Going to go ahead and continue with our betting 101 today. Got a special treat for you guys. Have AJ Hoffman, Pregame Pro. Going to talk a little UFC betting 101. I have a couple basic questions here for AJ. Now, for those of you guys who don't know AJ, he actually had fought, MMA professionally. He works for ESPN Radio right now, also with pregame.com. You guys can find him at Pregame. You can also find him on Twitter at AJ is the real. So AJ, here's what we'll do. I'm just going to go ahead and ask you a couple basic questions, and I'll let you go ahead and answer. First question, what type of bets can you make in an MMA fight?
Obviously, you can do. There'll be a win line like a minus 350 favorite or in a plus 275 underdog, just a straight up who's going to win the fight. You can also do total rounds. Usually, there's an over and under round, 2.5 rounds, 1.5 rounds, depending on the fight. And then there's tons of props, so you can bet fighter A to win by submission, for fighter B to win by knockout. You can pick which round a fight will end in. Usually, main events have more props to choose from, and a lot of that is just dependent on your book. But there's tons of ways to bet them.
All right, well, AJ, I don't know if you would agree with me here, but I believe that the UFC right now has probably one of the fastest expanding odds screens out there, of all the sports right now, because of the amount of growth that the MMA has had over the last couple of years. Next question here. Can you go ahead and parlay fighters from the same card, or can you parlay fighters from a different card together?
Parlaying fights on the same card is easy. Parlaying from separate cards would be dependent on your book, really. If they're both up and available at the same time, you can do it. Or if your book allows you to have open parlays, you can do it, obviously. But they would both have to be on the board at the same time otherwise.
All right, that's a rather short and easy one there. Let's jump into if a fight is canceled but then rebooked immediately. Let's just say it's for the next week or maybe 2 weeks out. Is the bet void or is it still on?
If a fight's canceled and rescheduled, the bet is voided completely. The book will reset the odds based on the news of why a fight may have been canceled, and it'll be made available before the next fight.
Yeah, I kind of figured that'd be a layup there for you, AJ. How about live betting? Is there live betting in MMA? And if there is, can you bet in the middle of a fight when a fight is actually going on?
That's something new that's come along, live betting in fights. You can't really bet in the middle of a round, but what they've started to do is make odds available to you at the end of each round. So if there's a 3-round fight and at the end of round 1 it looks just completely lopsided, the odds can shift dramatically, but you can bet live that this person is either going to continue to dominate or that this other fighter is going to make a big comeback.
All right, certainly good information there. How about prop bets? Is a prop bet a good bet in MMA or a sucker bet?
I don't know if there's any good bets or sucker bets. I don't know. I guess maybe I could also be a sucker, but I think that props often give you a lot of value. There's a lot of ways where you may see a big favorite that is going to win, and there's not a lot of value in him winning, but you also know he's going to finish that fight. So you can bet that he wins inside the distance, and that will boost your payout some. So for me, I use props as a way to sweeten my comeback.
Now, with prop bets out of the way, what is a typical bet limit on an MMA fight?
Yeah, your bet limits will depend on your book. Normally, the straight up who's going to win the fight, those will have pretty high limits. At least online, usually it's $1,000. So I've got another book that really doesn't put any limit on me on MMA. It's just like football. I mean, I guess it's as much as you want to bet. And then on the prop bets, usually I would guess there's usually about a $500 limit on those. I think some of them even have a $200 limit. But again, that is all dependent on your book.
AJ, I'm not surprised at some of the limits that the books do put on MMA fights. I think one of the reasons is, we hear often in, let's just say the UFC in general, that fighters are underpaid. And I think that's, something that would raise a flag to a sports book, thinking that there may be something fishy that potentially could, go on. So I'm not actually surprised that some of the fight limits, are actually low. Now, is there a place that you can go to find, good fight stats, maybe particular matchups, whether it would be, like striking numbers against defense? Is there anything that we can look at that would be, similar to, how we can go ahead and find like, the NFL stats and NBA stats?
Recently, the UFC has started to post those stats for their fighters. So if you're betting the UFC, you can go to UFCstats.com and you can find out the significant strikes landed per minute, striking accuracy, takedown defense, things like that. But the caveat is they're only for the fights that those guys have had in the UFC. So if a guy's fought on a regional circuit or in a foreign country, then it's a little more difficult to get those stats. But for guys who have established themselves in the UFC, that's become a really valuable sort of tool that the UFC has put out there for bettors.
So this is the question I wanted to ask you the most. Is there a fight style that's more successful than the other in MMA?
Well, historically, wrestling has been the best base for MMA. For the longest time, jiu-jitsu was king, and when the UFC was invented, not everyone knew jiu-jitsu, and so Hoist Gracie was able to just run through these guys who didn't really understand the efficiency of jiu-jitsu. But now, almost everybody knows jiu-jitsu. If you fight, you do jiu-jitsu training, and if you fight, you probably do wrestling training too. But you can get really proficient as a jiu-jitsu guy. I know guys who have black belts who have been doing jiu-jitsu for 5 or 6 years. They're very, very, very talented at it, but it is possible to fast track. You cannot make up a lifetime of wrestling in 5 or 6 years. It just doesn't work that way. So that's become sort of the most dominant part of people's games is wrestling. If you have a wrestling background to fall on top of at the end of the day, that to me trumps everything. If everything is equal, or even if a guy's a little deficient in striking or jiu-jitsu, but he can control a fight on the ground and dictate where the fight is, that's a pretty big advantage. And strikers have to fight differently against guys who they know could take them down.
Wow, I wouldn't have expected you to go ahead and say wrestling. I'm actually a little bit surprised at that, and that's why I asked you that question. Let's jump into our final one here. Why don't we just go ahead and bet a bunch of favorites? Do you think betting favorites long-term can be profitable?
It's just like saying why not bet big favorites in the NFL on the money line every week. I guess it can work for a while, but eventually it catches up to you. I don't think it's profitable long-term. You just pick and choose your spots, and like I said, if it's a big favorite, I'm usually not going to take it unless I'm doing some kind of a prop. Honestly, I think the better thing is to find value in the small underdogs, or guys who are maybe favored, but it's like minus 115, things like that. If you find a nice advantage there, that's a good spot to take advantage of. But taking a bunch of minus 750 favorites, the fight game is too crazy. Silly things happen too often to go that route.
All right, guys. Well, there you go. Big thanks to AJ Hoffman. As I had mentioned, you guys can find AJ Hoffman at pregame.com. You can get him on Twitter at AJ is the real. Make sure you guys check back here at pregame.com for more Betting 101.